Picture a moment frozen in time. Oxford University, 8 centuries old, has never known such silence. Professor Edmund Harrington has just declared, Africa has contributed nothing to human civilization. 500 scholars hold their breath. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, rises from his seat. No one could predict that his next 10 minutes would ignite a global firestorm, toppling a career and rewriting history. It was a crisp March afternoon at Oxford's Sheldonian Theatre, packed for a lecture on global leadership. World leaders and academics filled the program, but Ibrahim Traoré, invited for the African Leadership Series, sat quietly in the front row. Dressed in a simple dark suit, he took notes as speakers discussed democracy, development, and cooperation. At 3:30 p.m., Professor Harrington took the stage. Silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, and a towering figure in European history, his presence commanded respect. His introduction glowed. Rhodes Scholar, author of 12 books, holder of 3 honorary doctorates. Harrington began with unshakable confidence. "The pillars of human progress are clear," he said, his voice echoing. "Mathematics from Greece, law from Rome, philosophy from Germany, industry from Britain. Civilization, ladies and gentlemen, is undeniably Western." A few in the audience shifted uncomfortably, but he pressed on. 20 minutes in, he dropped the bombshell. "Some might ask about other continents. Asia gave us paper, the Americas calendars. But Africa?" He paused, a smirk flickering. "Name one significant contribution from sub-Saharan Africa. That continent has only received civilization, never shaped it." The room fell silent. Traoré closed his notebook, set his pen down, and raised his hand. Harrington, visibly irritated, nodded. "Yes?" Traoré stood, calm and deliberate. "Professor Harrington, may I respond?" His voice was steady, no microphone needed. Harrington's smirk widened. "By all means, Mr." He feigned ignorance, though Traoré had been introduced earlier. Traoré, Ibrahim Traoré. He omitted his title, stepping to the podium with a leather folder. The audience leaned forward, some discreetly recording. Harrington waved dismissively. "Enlighten us, but stick to facts, not sentiment." Traoré opened his folder, locking eyes with Harrington. "Professor, have you studied the Timbuktu manuscripts, the Dogon people's mathematics, the Haya's metallurgical techniques?" Harrington scoffed. "Mud huts and folklore aren't civilization. We're discussing human advancement." Gasps rippled through the room, but Traoré remained unruffled. He held up a photocopy. "This is from the Lubombo bone, found in Swaziland, 44,000 years old. It bears the earliest known mathematical calculations, lunar cycles etched in bone. Mathematics began in Africa, not Greece." Harrington's smirk faltered. "Counting notches isn't Pythagoras," he shot back. Traoré pulled another document. "Then consider the Ishango bone, 20,000 years old, from Congo. It shows prime numbers and multiplication, predating Greek mathematics by millennia." He paused, letting the weight sink in. "Or the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, housing 700,000 manuscripts and 25,000 students in the 12th century, when Oxford was barely a tavern." The audience was rapt. Harrington interjected, "Isolated examples." Traoré raised a hand, silencing him. "Isolated? The Ashanti Confederacy's constitution had checks and balances 3 centuries before America's. The Buganda Parliament practiced democratic governance while Europe groveled under monarchs. And philosophy? Zira Yaqub, an Ethiopian, wrote on rational inquiry and human rights in the 1600s, before the Enlightenment. His student, Walda Haywat, rivaled Europe's ethicists. But they wrote in Ge'ez, not Latin, so perhaps they don't count in your world." Harrington's face reddened. "These are exaggerations." Traoré's voice sharpened. "Exaggerations? The Library of Alexandria, founded by an African dynasty, preserved global knowledge while your ancestors lived in huts. African surgeons performed cataract operations in Mali in the 14th century. The first successful cesarean section, with mother and child surviving, happened in Uganda in 1879, decades before Europe. Smallpox variolation, the precursor to vaccination, was practiced in West Africa and carried to America by enslaved Africans. He held up another paper. The Great Zimbabwe's acoustics outmatch modern engineering. Nubian pyramids predate Egypt's. The Haya people forged carbon steel 2,000 years ago, a technique Europe wouldn't master until the Industrial Revolution. And agriculture? Africans domesticated millet, sorghum, yams, and okra, sustaining cities in the Sahel while Europe languished in the Dark Ages. Harrington, now sweating, tried to interrupt. "This is revisionist nonsense." Traor's gaze was unrelenting. "Nonsense? Here's a twist, Professor. Did you know your own Rhodes Scholarship, which funded your career, was built on Cecil Rhodes's fortune? In his letters, he urged the suppression of African history to justify colonization. Your ignorance isn't accidental. It's inherited." The room gasped. This revelation, tying Harrington's prestige to a colonial agenda, was a dagger. Traore softened his tone. "But let's talk about Ubuntu, the African philosophy of I am because we are. While Europe obsessed over conquest, Africans developed restorative justice and collective dignity, ideas the world now chases. The tragedy, Professor, isn't that Africa contributed nothing. It's that scholars like you spent centuries erasing it. When Timbuktu's library dwarfed Europe's, you called us illiterate. When our astronomers tracked Sirius B, you called us superstitious. When our healers performed surgeries, you called them witch doctors." He closed his folder. "The question isn't whether Africa shaped civilization. It's why you, at this prestigious university, deny it, or worse, know it and lie." A young African woman in the third row clapped first, then another. Within seconds, the theater erupted in applause. Students stood, then professors, even administrators. Professor Mary Whitfield, head of African Studies, rose. "Mr. President," she said, using Traor's title, "I apologize. Your words expose a shameful gap in our curriculum. I move that Oxford revise its history programs to reflect these truths." Harrington stood alone, his authority shattered. Traore returned to his seat, pausing by the professor. "I've left my sources with your department," he said quietly, microphones catching every word. "Read them." The aftermath was swift. Videos of Traor's speech exploded online, titled "African President Dismantles Oxford Professor" and "Epic Takedown of Academic Prejudice." By morning, they had millions of views. The hashtag #Africa Built Civilization trended globally. Harrington announced his retirement the next day. Oxford issued an apology and launched a curriculum review. The Sheldonian would host an annual lecture on African contributions, starting with Traore. Students flocked to African studies programs. Scholars traveled to Timbuktu's archives and studied Dogon astronomy. A year later, Oxford unveiled a statue of Ahmed Baba al-Timbuktu, the 16th century scholar whose 1,600 books educated generations. Its inscription read, "Knowledge has no color. Wisdom has no continent. Truth belongs to all." Years later, Traore reflected in an interview. "I didn't plan that speech. But when Harrington spoke, I thought of African children hearing those lies. I thought of minds erased from history. Silence wasn't an option." Asked if he was too harsh, he shook his head. "For centuries, our history was written by those who enslaved and colonized us. Truth isn't harsh. It's necessary. Harrington had 47 years to learn. I just refused to let ignorance stand." The Traore moment became a global case study, a reminder that knowledge demands humility and courage. In classrooms from Lagos to London, teachers now start African history lessons with a simple truth. Africa didn't just join civilization, it's where it began. That March afternoon's silence wasn't just the end of a career. It was the start of a reckoning about whose stories are told, whose achievements are celebrated, and whose contributions endure.